Coming up on this episode, the reasons behind Jonathan Kuminga's incredible recent form. So how sustainable is it moving forward? And within that, what should the goals be from an individual standpoint for the remainder of the season? Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast after the Warriors got a 119-107 win over the Philadelphia 76ers at Chase Center on Tuesday night. A comfortable-ish win, I suppose, for the Warriors. Certainly not without its anxiety. The Warriors were only up 3 with 8.5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Managed to go on a bit of a run, which culminated with a Steph Curry layup after the kind of Jonathan Kuminga, Joel Embiid incident of sorts, however you want to describe it. That put the Warriors up 14. Embiid limped off the floor, wasn't to be seen again, and that was kind of the end of the game in terms of the result at that point. So nice to be able to get to the last, the 2 minutes left in the game and the win kind of wrapped up without having to fight for it down the stretch. So that's nice for fans, certainly nice for the players and the coaches, I'm sure. But the Warriors got another back-to-back coming up here. It's going to be an important time. We've got the NBA trade deadline coming up now in less than a week. Doesn't seem like the Warriors are going to do too much of significance. They might not do anything at all, and if they do, it's probably going to be on the minor end. And then, of course, All-Star Weekend coming up, where hopefully the Warriors can kind of get on a bit of a run here before that comes around. There's certainly a lot more optimism and positivity around Golden State at the moment. Yes, they had back-to-back heartbreaking one-point losses before this win over the 76ers. But just in general, they are playing a whole lot better. 20-24 on the season. They're still a long way back, still 12th in the Western Conference. But we've still got 38 games left to go in the regular season. And so there is still time here. Destiny is still in their own hands. But a lot of that optimism and positivity has been born from the incredible recent form of Jonathan Kuminga. And that's what I wanted to get into on this episode, kind of spend a whole episode talking about JK. How sustainable is this level of production and what his goal should be for the remainder of the season from an individual standpoint. So before we get into kind of general thoughts and stuff, let's just go back through the numbers, give people an understanding of what's actually going on here, because I think it's just starting to garner some league-wide attention rather than just being, a Golden State-focused thing. So the last 7 games here, 24 points and 5 rebounds on 9 of 12 shooting, 28 on 10 of 18 shooting, 20 points and 11 rebounds on 9 of 18 shooting, 25 and 9 on 11 of 11 shooting. Of course, that tied the franchise record with Chris Mullin. A career-high 31 on 12 of 19 shooting, 22 and 9 rebounds on 8 of 16 shooting, 26 and 7 boards on 11 of 19 shooting against the 76ers on Tuesday night. So across the 7-game span, 25.1 points on 61.9% shooting from the floor, 54.5% from three-point range on 3.1 attempts per game, 6.7 rebounds, which I think is important. We'll get into that in a second. And players to have averaged 25 points and shoot 60% from the floor during that span is 2 players in the league, Jonathan Kuminga and Nikola Jokic. And so for JK to be in the company of the 2-time MVP, he's also a center, mind you, as opposed to kind of a power forward that JK is. It's unbelievable. This is star-level production that we are seeing that is far, far greater than what he's done at any stage throughout his career. I think they put a stat up on the broadcast on Tuesday night that before this stretch, he'd had 13 20-point games in his career. And in fact, it might have been including this stretch. I'm not exactly sure. But, of course, he's had 7 in a row now, 20-point games. And it's just unbelievable. It's crazy to think where we've come from, where you think about the fact, if you go back to December 6th, less than 2 months ago, he is a DNP at home against the Portland Trailblazers until the third quarter, where the Warriors are down double digits and Steve basically is forced to go back to JK. Otherwise, he was going to be a DNP in that game. He was. And then, of course, January 5, we're talking about less than a month ago, he has that game against the Denver Nuggets where he doesn't play at all in the last 18 minutes, despite playing well. That was a huge storyline. We had the report from Shams the following day stating that JK had lost faith in Steve Kerr and his ability to develop him. Well, these numbers are just crazy since then. It's been an unbelievable turnaround. Just to get into some of kind of the advanced stats rather than just the raw box score numbers. The big one for me, I think, is the unassisted versus assisted percentage of field goal makes. So on the season as a whole, and this includes the last 7 games, his assisted versus unassisted ratio is 35.8%. So 35.8% of his field goal makes are coming unassisted. In the last 7 games alone, that's risen to 41.4%. So that tells me it's a lot more ISO stuff. It's a lot more JK looking for his own shot rather than, feeding off Steph and Clay and others. So I think that's a huge shift. Just the general aggressiveness over these last 7 games is unbelievable. So if we look at the field goal attempts from the paint and the restricted area combined, on the season, he's under 7. I think it was about 6.95 field goal attempts per game from the paint and the restricted area combined. Now, he is at 11.9 over the last 7 games. That's a huge jump. That is a huge jump. And then as a result, points in the paint on the season, an average of 8.6 per game. Last 7 games, 15.4. That's nearly double the amount of points in the paint that he's getting each game. The other big thing for me, because with JK, the 3-point shooting has always been the question mark, right? And we all thought, geez, if he develops a 3-point jumper, then watch out. It's actually not necessarily the case. So yes, he's shooting well from 3 across his stretch, 54.5%. That's probably unlikely to continue. But I think the bigger thing is, if you look at the percentage of threes that he's taken on the season and then in the last 7 games. So basically the numbers are that for the season, 1 of every 4 field goal attempts is a 3-pointer from Jonathan Kuminga. Now, in the last 7 games, it's 1 in every 5. So his percentage of field goal attempts, the percentage of threes are far less than what they have been historically. And so I think that's really important, because we thought, if he develops a 3 ball, then it's over. When it's actually not the case. Like, he's actually relying on his 3-point jump shot less, which I think is really important as well. The usage rate overall has gone from 23.4% to 25%. Slight rise, not huge, but enough to be significant, I think. So is this sustainable, right? Is this level of play sustainable? I think it is. Because not only have we had now 7 games of 20-point, not only have we had 7 20-point games in a row, but this is, I think, 24 games now with double figures. And remember, like at the start of that run where it was like, 7 games in a row, double figures, 8 games in a row of double figures, 9, 10. Like, when we got to that point, it was kind of notable. It was actually notable. And then it kind of got to 12, 15, 18. And the further it goes, the less relevant it actually is. Because now it's just the done thing. And now we're getting to a point of, okay, he's had this streak of 20-point games. How long is this one going to last? And it could be the same thing where if this randomly all of a sudden gets up to 12, 15, 20-point games in a row, which I think is unlikely. It's probably he's probably going to have a bad game at some point here, and he's probably not going to have 20. But if it was to get to like 12, 15, now we're all of a sudden thinking, okay, this is just who he is. And even at this point, 7 games of 20-point performances in a row, I think it's still like this is who he is to a degree. And beyond the numbers, right? So you can look at the numbers, whatever else. But I think just from a eye test perspective, you just look at what's happening over the last 7 games, and you can see some things that are completely changing. So I said a couple of episodes, the big thing for me is that he's gone from wanting to fit into the Golden State system to wanting to, from wanting to earn the trust of Steve and his teammates to, across this recent stretch, it seems like he's reverted back to, I'm a guy. I'm a star, basically, and I'm going to prove that. And it just seems to be a massive attitude shift from, wanting to fit into the Warrior system, play a Golden State style of way, to no, like I'm a guy here. And I just think that is huge for the Warriors. And I was listening to the Warriors Plus Minus podcast yesterday, and Anthony Slater made a really, really good comment where he said that the Warriors have struggled. Sorry, still struggling with my sickness. But the Warriors have struggled with the inability to tailor their system to the talents that they've got on the roster and the skills that they've got on the roster. And sometimes you need to do that. You can't just bring everyone in via draft, free agency, and trade and expect them to fit what you want to do as a team. You have to be able to be willing to adapt slightly. I'm not saying you change everything up for one player or anything like that, but you have to be able to adapt to the skill sets of the players on your roster. And I thought that comment from Slater was really good. And I think now we're seeing, maybe after a long wait for fans, a lot of frustration for fans, I think we're getting to a point now where Steve Kerr, where the Warriors in general are able to adapt to Jonathan Kuminga and who he is as a player, which is a guy that can be a bucket getter, who is unstoppable in the paint, who you can run plays through and you can post him up and he will go to work in the post. He's got this really nice mid-range fadeaway that's working really well at the moment, which is like a counter to obviously all the aggressive stuff going towards the rim. So I think that's really important, the fact that the Warriors have been able to adapt slightly to JK and what he wants to do as a player. And of course, I've always said there's going to be push and pull between his style and the Warriors style, but I think they're getting to a middle ground here, which is benefiting both player and team. There's a few other things to me that make this stand out a lot, aside from just what we're seeing on the floor with the numbers and whatever else. To me, there's been a clear directive in the media. I don't know how many times across the last couple of weeks we've heard from Draymond, and we've heard from Draymond and JK on that pair's kind of relationship, and JK speaking about how impactful and how important Draymond's been for him, and then Draymond just basically repeatedly telling us that, you know, he's telling JK, you're unstoppable. No one can guard you. You're a star. No one can guard you. He referred to JK as a star on his podcast episode again yesterday. And I just think that's been a huge directive in the media that, you know, Draymond, I think, is trying to make it clear to JK that I'm not just telling you these things privately. I'm telling everyone. I'm telling everyone that no one can guard you. I'm telling everyone that you are a star. Not just telling you privately. Not just in a one-on-one conversation. I'm happy to tell everyone. And I think that also goes to show you that Draymond is confident in what JK is doing. Like, Draymond's not going to necessarily come out and have a BS hot take for the sake of it. Like, he's not just going to come out and say, you know, Brandon Pajemski, he's a star. He's a star-level player. And no one can guard Brandon Pajemski. He's not going to say that because that's not true. But I think the fact that he's saying it about JK, he knows it. Like, he knows it. He's not just saying it for some PR stunt to try and get JK's confidence up. No. I think that is part of it. Like, he wants him to be confident and he wants him to be continually be aggressive. And stating that to the media is, I think, a big part of it. But it's also just factually true. No one can guard him right now. No one can. He's one of the most dominant inside forces in the league, literally, at the moment, over these last 7 games. And I think that was kind of shown a little bit in the Lakers game. So a couple of things from that one, obviously a marquee matchup on Saturday. First of all, I think there was a report pre-game that Darvin Ham kind of noted the recent play of Jonathan Kuminga. So that's one of the first times where you've heard that kind of publicly as well, where rival coaches, rival players, whatever else, are starting to take notice here. And then you got LeBron post-game, who made the comment of, you know, being kept young in this league, and he said, Kaminga keeps me young, kind of thing. And so the fact that LeBron mentioned JK specifically in the post-game, I think was really important. The Warriors got some young players, Pods, TJD, whatever else. LeBron doesn't necessarily make comments on 21-year-old guys like that in immediate post-game interviews. I thought that was really big. And then back from an on-court perspective, there was one play that is always going, like literally always going to stick out of my mind. Like if this guy does become an all-star caliber player and continues on this trajectory that we're seeing, there's one play one play that will always stick out to me as almost the moment. And it wasn't a big one. It wasn't important. It's not a highlight dunk that we see all the time from JK. It was the third quarter. JK posts up Austin Reeves. Torian Prince comes over to double team, and JK finds Wiggs for a wing three, and he makes it. Simple play, right? Nothing too spectacular. But I just thought, watching that, that's the first time where I think rival teams are realizing we can't let this guy live on an island. We cannot. They looked at that and said, if we just leave JK ISOing Austin Reeves, it's a bucket. It's a bucket. We have to come over and double team. And I think in years past, throughout the first 2.5 seasons of JK's career, I think they would have, rival teams have seen that, like him posting up, and thought, oh, it's just a young guy. It's just a young guy, and if he wants to go to work and get a bucket, good luck to him. We'd rather that happen than the ball get into Steph Curry's hands or Draymond Green's hands or Klay Thompson's hands or even Andrew Wiggins' hands. We would prefer the young player try and do what he wants to do and go to work himself. We'd much prefer that. This is the first time where I think the Lakers are like, no. There's no way we're leaving Austin Reeves on an island with Jonathan Kuminga. So Torian Prince comes over and doubles, and Wiggs hits the wing three. I just thought it just sticks out. For some reason, it just vividly sticks out in my mind as a play that I'm always going to remember, so long as, if this trajectory continues, if he is, in fact, a star-level player. That was the moment for me where I was just like, okay, no, rival teams know now. They know what this guy's about, what he can do if you don't, defend him properly, if you don't give him the respect that he now deserves. And I do think there might be a situation here where maybe there's a stretch. There's going to be a stretch where the numbers go down a little bit, right? Because that's starting to happen. Defenses, rival teams are starting to crack on to what he's doing, and as a result, they are going to scout him, more. And if the Warriors do make the playoffs, that's obviously going to be a huge thing. There is, I suppose, a notion that young players struggle at times in the playoffs. That's going to be a huge moment for him if Golden State can make the playoffs. And assuming that he continues this kind of production until that point, whether or not he can replicate it in the playoffs across a 7-game series where NBA defenses can get used to you, obviously do a lot more scouting and planning for you, that's going to be huge. But of course, the Warriors have to get to that point first, so we shouldn't be too concerned about that right now. I've seen a bit of stuff on social media across the last few days, I suppose, talking about Steve Kerr, whether or not this would have arrived at a much sooner point had Steve trusted JK from earlier in the piece. There's also arguments that, should Steve and the Warriors take credit for kind of challenging JK across the last couple of years and kind of bringing him along slowly, and being kind of a hard taskmaster, I suppose, to a degree? The answer to all that, I think, is neither. So there's no way Steve should be taking credit for this. I'm sorry. It's just not. But in saying that, do I think JK would have done this earlier had he trusted him? No, not necessarily. So I don't think it's a case of, Kerr taking credit or, this would have happened earlier had it not been for Kerr. I think there's genuine improvement in his game that just comes with time. And yes, that might have been accelerated slightly had he played more, but I think there's still the reps that need to be had on the training floor, whatever else, that I do think that we are reaching a level here, we are reaching a point here where he is doing stuff that he wouldn't have been able to do, even going back to the start of the season. And yes, you can point to preseason where he was the second leading scorer in the league, and you can say, well, if he just was able to do what he did in preseason at the start of the regular season, then he would have done it. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think there is huge improvement. The biggest thing for me is the ball handle. the ball handle, I think, is hugely improved, where he's always been able to finish, right? When he gets to the rim, he's always been able to finish, not just because he's so athletic, not just because he's so powerful, but because he's actually a pretty crafty finisher around the rim. On like post-ups and stuff like that, he's always had really crafty footwork to me. He's had an incredible pump fake basically for his whole career, where guys, even though he's not a great jump shooter, tend to bite on his pump fake, and then he can kind of lean in and go to the free throw line, which is a big thing for the Warriors and a team that don't necessarily go to the free throw line a whole lot, which is another thing. Like, I always kind of laugh when guys like, oh, he has no feel for the game. No feel for the game. No basketball IQ. And then you look at some of the footwork stuff, some of the pump fake stuff, and it's like, no, he's got feel for the game. He's got feel for the game. Now, does he have Golden State feel for the game and the way they want to play? That's more of a question. But to say he's got no feel for the game, you see some of the footwork, see some of the pump fake stuff that he was able to produce in his rookie year and his second year. I think that was always an unfair notion kind of thing. But I think it's now the ability with the improved ball handle, the ability to actually get to the rim is far greater. I think during his rookie second year, even maybe earlier this season, there's so many times where he would drive and he would get stripped, he would lose the ball, he would, clamor, crack into a double team kind of thing, and the ball just pries loose, and the other team's on the other way for a transition. That doesn't seem to be happening a whole lot anymore. It still does. There was a play or two, I think, against the 76ers where he was trying to post up and he loses the ball. Of course, you remember that Kings game where he's posting up Harrison Barnes and he kind of loses the ball in a layup attempt. I think they credited Barnes with the block. But that doesn't seem to be happening as much. And that was the plays that were infuriating for Steve, is the one where you've got Steph, Clay, Draymond out on the floor, and JK's like, nah, it's me time. And he drives to the rim and he tries to go against three defenders and he loses it. And now it seems like he can get to the rim a lot easier. One-on-one situations, he's not getting stripped as much. He's able to navigate through the lane around defenders, whatever else, blow by defenders, and just get to the rim far easier and at a far more efficient level than what he was able to do in the past, where a lot of his drives at times were out of control. And maybe sometimes he still manages to finish because he's a good finisher, not just a powerful finisher, but he's pretty crafty around the rim. That's the biggest. I think the ball handle is the most improved aspect to his game, because it allows him to be able to get to the rim a whole lot more, where, as we've said, he's absolutely unstoppable. So the goals moving forward for the rest of the season for JK, from a scoring aspect, I think, if you go back to the start of the season, we always, as Warrior fans, always clamoring for Golden State to have a second 20-point scorer next to Steph. And, it was Clay, it was Wiggs, nearly to a degree. But obviously with their lack of production this season, that's largely why the Warriors have struggled. And across this recent stretch, we've seen the offense has been great. They've been a top 5 offense in the league over the last 10 games or so. And now it's a defensive issue. And it's going to be interesting to see if they address that at the trade deadline. But I think JK here has been the key reason why the offense is now really good. And it just is. And it's the defensive issues that the Warriors are having that's meaning that they're still losing some of these close games. They're still struggling, 20-24 record and whatnot. But I think further establishing himself as a 20-point scorer, like, are we doing that? I looked the other day. On Sportsbet, which is the biggest bookmaker, I suppose, for us in Australia. And JK was odds on to have 20 plus points. So, bookies are setting his line at 9.5, 20.5 points at the moment. So is that just who he is now? Are we saying he's a 20-point scorer? If you're not saying that now, if there's some skeptics about that, which is fine, it's 7 games. Before that, he's done far less than what he's obviously produced over the last 7 games. If you're still skeptical, I think from a JK perspective, you want him to be able to establish himself completely as a 20-point scorer where it's just undeniable. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing for him and the biggest thing for the Warriors offense, because, as we said, they still need that go-to guy outside Steph. And I think it's been notable. There have been times where JK has been the go-to guy down the stretch. I just spoke about that play against Harrison Barnes. That was a 1-point game with 30 seconds on the clock, where in fact it might have been less than that. It was like 20 seconds on the clock, and they went to JK in a post-up to try and get back in front. So the trust that Steve is having in him now, I think should allow him to become this 20-point per game scorer that he wants to be and that we want him to be as fans. But it's a whole lot more than that. I think the rebounding still comes and goes. There's still games so he had 7 rebounds against the 76ers on Tuesday night, which is okay. 7 rebounds should be his average, and that's what it kind of is over these last 7 games, 6.7 per game. But I think halfway through the second quarter, I think he was on 0. And he still has these times, even throughout games, where his intensity in terms of rebounding the ball just wavers completely. Like sometimes he'll really want to get on the boards, and he shows he's really capable, and he'll get 4 or 5 in a quarter. And then there'll be another period, another 12-minute period where he's just doesn't have an appetite for it at all, and he doesn't get any. And I think it's really important that he continues to use his size and athleticism in more ways than just scoring, and rebounding, I think, is a huge aspect. And of course, the other aspect is defense. And there are still plenty of occasions where there are defensive lapses where maybe there's a lack of effort slightly, but probably the more important thing is still some of the schematic stuff where, coming over to double team for no particular reason, or not double teaming for no particular reason, like that LeBron drive in the Lakers game to end. I spoke about it last episode. JK should have come over there. Should have come over and gave help there. Left Taurean Prince. If Taurean Prince wants to hit the wide open 3 to win the game, let him do it. And I think that would have been the directive from Steve. And if it wasn't the directive from Steve, I still think you've got to have the basketball feel and IQ to understand that, okay, we don't want a driving LeBron James here trying to win the game. We want him driving, kicking, and make someone else beat us. And so that was a poor defensive play from JK in that scenario. And there are plenty of times where there are defensive lapses from him. But again, that's going to come with opportunity. It's going to come with more playing time. It's going to come with more reps. It's going to come with more confidence on the offensive end, like just generally more confidence in his game, which is normally, it normally comes from what he's doing offensively, but that can also impact what he does defensively as well. So I think they're the biggest things across the remainder of the season. Establishing himself as a 20-point scorer, which is what he wants to do. But from a team aspect, rebounding the ball and defense, that's what's really going to help lift the Warriors here out of the hole that they're currently in and back to hopefully a spot 1 in the play-in tournament, and if not, hopefully the playoffs outright and not having to go through the dreaded play-in. The other big thing I'll just finish up here with is the fact that he's extension eligible in the offseason. So that's going to be a huge thing for him. It's going to be a huge thing for the Warriors. Based on what he's done across these last 7 games, like if he was extension eligible right now and the Warriors came to him with anything less than triple figures in terms of $100 million, then I think I would say no if I was him. I think I'd say no. I look at this and think, with the way the league's going, I suppose just in terms of the salary cap and numbers that guys are getting, I think he's $100 million player. I do. And again, some fans I think will be skeptical of that. Some rival fans will probably laugh at that, thinking you're not going to give a guy $100 million based on 7 games. Well, I think it's more than 7 games. I think, as I said again, 24 games now in a row of double-figure scoring. And sometimes you've also just got to pay on talent and the trajectory of where these players are going. If you look back at the Jordan Poole one, now you can look back and say 4 years, 128 was stupid, ridiculous. That's one of the worst contracts in the league now. At the time, I don't think it was. That was just the going rate for an explosive young guard who's looking like he could be an all-star level player in the future. That's kind of where Jordan Poole was at, coming off a championship after his 3rd season. That was the kind of level, and that's what Tyler Hero got paid. That's what like Anthony Simons got paid. These kind of explosive guards who can be 20-plus point per game scorers. And so if you are a 20-point per game scorer, and we're talking about JK establishing himself as such, then that's $100 million. It just is. And the Warriors are going to have some decisions to make because they've obviously got Klay Thompson needing a new contract. Chris Paul, who's got a $30 million option for next season, which I don't think anyone believes any team will pick up, regardless of whether he's at the Warriors or if he gets traded in the next week. There's decisions to be made. Kevon Looney's got a partially guaranteed $8 million for next season. He's $3 million for next season. Gary Payton II, I think, has got a player option, which he's obviously going to, I think, given the injuries, he's probably going to pick that up. So the Warriors have decisions to make. Moses Moody, of course, is also extension eligible, assuming he doesn't get traded in the next week here. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to make some sacrifices here. I think ideally you would want to, I think you'd probably just waive Chris Paul. Just say, yep, thanks, but no thanks, and let him enter free agency. I think you try and bring Klay back on a number, probably nearly half of that $43.5 million that he's making this season, somewhere between 20 and 25. And then hopefully JK, maybe if he continues to do what he's doing, maybe the franchise is comfortable with giving him 4 years, $100 million. And even then, if he continues to do what he's doing for the remainder of the season, maybe that all of a sudden bumped up to 120. That's like not out of the realms of possibility that by the end of this season, we're saying, okay, to re-sign this guy, to provide him with a contract extension, you're going to have to fork out 4 years, $120 million. And it's quickly rising. It quickly is rising because I think before this, most would have said, oh, maybe he's a 50, 60, maybe max $80 million player across 4 years, maybe, I guess, on his next contract. Now it's like, oh, no, he's 4 years, 100. Yeah, I think he is. And that might be being conservative in, the current NBA, modern NBA, where, we're basically nearly exceeding $60 million per season deals for players. $25 million is actually, $25 million is kind of the old $15 million now. And I think that's, as fans and analysts, that's how we've got to kind of view it. Other than that, guys, we'll finish it up there on this episode of JK. Hopefully, it wasn't too bad of a listen for you. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you've reached this point, you can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Warriors got this back-to-back coming up. Hopefully another couple of wins. But until the next episode, enjoy the rest of your week, and let's hope for a couple of Warrior dubs.